Maria Santos adjusted her black dress for the third time as she walked across the parking lot of the Naval Academy. The June sun beat down mercilessly on the asphalt, but she barely noticed the heat. Today was the day she had been waiting for, dreaming about and saving every penny for over the past 4 years. Her son Marcus was graduating from one of the most prestigious military academies in the country, and nothing could have kept her away from this moment. She clutched her purse tighter, feeling the weight of the small digital camera inside. Maria had worked double shifts at the diner for months to afford the trip from their small hometown in Texas to Annapolis, Maryland. The bus ride had taken 36 hours, but she would have crawled on her hands and knees if necessary to see Marcus receive his commission as a naval officer. As she approached the massive stone buildings of the academy, Maria felt a mix of pride and nervousness wash over her. She had never been to a place like this before. The towering structures seemed to reach toward the sky, their windows gleaming in the sunlight like watchful eyes. Uniformed personnel moved with purpose across the manicured grounds, their polished shoes clicking against the walkways in perfect rhythm. Maria found herself walking slower, taking in every detail. She wanted to remember this day forever. The American flags that lined the pathways fluttered gently in the breeze, and she could hear the distant sound of a military band practicing somewhere on the campus. Everything here spoke of tradition, honor, and achievement. Her heart swelled with pride, knowing that her Marcus belonged in this world now. Finding her way to the graduation ceremony venue proved more challenging than expected. The campus was enormous, and Maria found herself asking for directions twice. Each person she approached was polite and helpful, pointing her toward the large outdoor amphitheater where families were already gathering. She noticed how young many of the other parents looked, how confident they seemed navigating this environment. Many wore expensive clothes and carried themselves with the ease of people accustomed to formal events. Maria smoothed down her dress again, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. She had bought the dress at a discount store, and though it was clean and pressed, she knew it was nothing compared to the designer outfits she saw around her. But she pushed those thoughts aside. This day was not about her. It was about Marcus and everything he had accomplished. As she found her assigned seat among the hundreds of folding chairs arranged in neat rows, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Marcus had always been different from the other kids in their neighborhood. While his friends were content with average grades and modest dreams, Marcus studied late into the night by the light of a small desk lamp. He talked constantly about serving his country, about making a difference in the world. When Marcus announced his intention to apply to the Naval Academy, Maria had been both proud and terrified. Proud because she knew her son was capable of achieving anything he set his mind to, but terrified because she understood that acceptance would mean years of separation, and the possibility that he might be sent into dangerous situations. Still, she had supported his dream completely, even when it meant he would be thousands of miles away from home. The application process had been grueling. Marcus needed recommendations from congressmen, stellar academic records, and exceptional physical fitness scores. Maria had watched him train every morning before school, running miles through their quiet streets while most of the town still slept. She had helped him practice for interviews, listened to him rehearse answers to difficult questions, and held him when the stress became overwhelming. When the acceptance letter arrived, Maria had cried harder than she had since Marcus's father died in a construction accident when the boy was only 8 years old. Those tears were a mixture of joy, pride, and the bittersweet realization that her little boy was truly grown up and ready to take on the world without her guidance. Now, sitting in the warm sunshine surrounded by hundreds of other proud families, Maria felt that familiar tightness in her throat that preceded tears of happiness. She watched as academy staff members made final preparations for the ceremony, adjusting microphones and arranging flowers on the podium. Everything was perfect, just as Marcus deserved. She pulled out her camera and tested it, making sure the battery was fully charged and that she had enough memory space for dozens of photos. Maria had never been good with technology, but she had practiced using the camera for weeks, determined to capture every moment of this special day. She wanted to take pictures that Marcus could look at years from now and remember not just his graduation, but the love and support that had helped get him there. As more families filled the seats around her, Maria listened to their conversations and felt a pang of loneliness. Many seemed to know each other from previous academy events or from their own military backgrounds. They talked easily about naval traditions, military protocols, and their children's future assignments. Maria realized she was probably one of the few single mothers in attendance, certainly one of the few who had never been part of military life before. But that loneliness was quickly replaced by determination. She might not understand all the traditions or know the proper etiquette for military ceremonies, but she understood love, sacrifice, and the importance of education. She had raised a son who was about to become a naval officer, and that was an achievement that no amount of money or social status could diminish. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and Maria felt perspiration beginning to form on her forehead. She reached into her purse for a tissue and, in doing so, inadvertently pushed up the sleeve of her dress slightly. The movement revealed just a small portion of the tattoo on her left forearm, a tattoo she had gotten many years ago and usually kept carefully hidden. Maria quickly pulled her sleeve back down, glancing around to see if anyone had noticed. The tattoo was a reminder of a part of her life that she preferred to keep private, especially in settings like this where she wanted to make the best possible impression. She had learned long ago that people often made quick judgments based on appearances, and today was too important to risk any misunderstandings or unwanted attention. As the ceremony was about to begin, Maria took a deep breath and focused on the reason she was there. Somewhere among the hundreds of midshipmen who would soon march onto the field was her son, her Marcus, ready to begin the next chapter of his remarkable life. The sound of military drums echoed across the academy grounds as the graduation ceremony officially began. Maria felt her heart skip a beat as hundreds of midshipmen began marching onto the field in perfect formation, their white uniforms gleaming in the sunlight. She raised her camera, trying to spot Marcus among the sea of identical figures moving with precision that seemed almost impossible to achieve. Commander James Mitchell stood at attention near the reviewing stand, his Navy SEAL trident gleaming on his chest. At 38, he had seen more combat than most men twice his age, and today he was here in his official capacity as a representative of the Special Operations community. Several of the graduating midshipmen had already been selected for SEAL training, and it was his job to observe them, to get a sense of who these young officers were before they entered the most demanding military training in the world. James had graduated from the same academy 15 years earlier, but he rarely attended these ceremonies. Today was different, though. Admiral Richardson had specifically asked him to be here, to evaluate 3 particular graduates who had shown exceptional promise during their time at the academy. James respected the Admiral's judgment, so despite his preference for avoiding formal events, he had agreed to attend. As the ceremony proceeded through the traditional speeches and presentations, James found his attention wandering to the families in the audience. He had grown up in a military family where both parents were career officers, so events like this had been a regular part of his childhood. But he understood that for many of these families, today represented something entirely new and perhaps intimidating. His trained eye automatically scanned the crowd, a habit developed through years of assessing potential threats and reading people in high-stress situations. Most of the families looked exactly as he expected, well-dressed, confident, clearly comfortable with military traditions. But one woman caught his attention, sitting several rows back and slightly to his left. She was alone, which was unusual for such an important family event. She appeared to be in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back neatly and wearing a simple black dress that, while appropriate, seemed less expensive than most of the other outfits he observed. What struck him most was her expression of intense concentration and pride as she watched the ceremony, occasionally raising a small camera to take pictures. There was something about her posture, the way she held herself, that suggested she was not entirely comfortable in this environment, but was determined not to let that show. James had seen that same combination of pride and nervous energy in many people over the years, usually in situations where they were slightly out of their element, but refusing to be intimidated. As the ceremony continued and the first group of graduates was called forward to receive their commissions, James noticed the woman's excitement level increase dramatically. She leaned forward in her seat, camera ready, apparently trying to spot someone specific among the approaching graduates. When a young Hispanic man broke into a brief smile while walking past her section, she quickly snapped several photos, and James realized this must be her son. The resemblance was subtle but unmistakable in the shape of their faces and the way they both carried themselves with quiet dignity. James found himself impressed by the young man's bearing and confidence. Not all new graduates managed to look so composed during their first major military ceremony. But this young officer moved with the kind of self-assurance that suggested he would adapt well to military life. During a brief pause in the ceremony while the next group of graduates was assembled, James noticed something that made him look more carefully at the woman. As she reached into her purse for what appeared to be tissues, the sleeve of her dress rode up slightly on her left arm. For just a moment, he caught sight of what looked like the edge of a tattoo. Under normal circumstances, James would not have thought much about a tattoo. Many people had them these days, and they had become far more socially acceptable than in previous generations. But something about the partial image he glimpsed made him look again. The few lines he could see appeared to be part of a military insignia, though he could not make out enough detail to be certain. James felt his curiosity growing, but he forced himself to focus back on the ceremony. As a Navy SEAL, he had developed an almost supernatural ability to notice details that others might miss, and to remember images with photographic precision. The partial tattoo he had seen included what looked like an eagle, some kind of anchor or rope design and possibly lettering, though he had only glimpsed it for a fraction of a second. Something about the combination of elements in that tattoo was familiar, triggering a memory that he could not quite bring into focus. James had seen thousands of military tattoos over the years, from simple branch insignias to elaborate commemorative pieces honoring fallen comrades. But this one felt different, more specific, as if it represented something beyond general military service. The ceremony proceeded through the traditional elements: speeches from distinguished guests, the presentation of academic awards, and the formal commissioning of the new officers. James found himself dividing his attention between his official duties observing the selected graduates and his growing curiosity about the woman and her partially visible tattoo. When the graduates were instructed to throw their caps into the air in the traditional celebration, James watched as the woman jumped to her feet with obvious joy, taking picture after picture of the celebration. In her excitement, she applauded enthusiastically, and her movement caused her sleeve to shift again. This time James got a slightly better view of the tattoo, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The design was not just any military insignia. James could now make out enough detail to recognize elements that were specific to a very particular unit, one that officially did not exist, and whose members were sworn to secrecy about their service. It was the kind of tattoo that only someone with direct knowledge of certain classified operations would even know how to design, let alone choose to have permanently marked on their body. James felt his training kick in as he tried to process what he was seeing. There were very few explanations for how a civilian woman at a Naval Academy graduation could have that specific tattoo. Either she had served in an extremely classified unit herself, which seemed unlikely given her apparent age and background, or she had been closely connected to someone who had served in such a unit. As the ceremony concluded and families began moving toward the reception area to meet with their newly commissioned officers, James found himself in an impossible situation. His curiosity about the tattoo was now far more than casual interest. If his identification was correct, that woman was wearing permanent evidence of connection to operations that most government officials did not even know existed. He watched as she gathered her purse and camera, carefully adjusting her sleeve to ensure the tattoo was completely covered, before joining the crowd moving toward the reception area. Her movements were deliberate and practiced, suggesting that hiding the tattoo was something she did habitually, not just a response to being in a formal military setting. James knew he should probably let the matter drop. Whatever the explanation for the tattoo, it was most likely none of his business, and approaching a civilian at a family celebration to ask personal questions would be highly inappropriate. But his training and experience had taught him that some things were too important to ignore, especially when they involved potential security implications. As he began moving through the crowd toward the reception area, James made a decision that would change everything. He was going to find a way to get a better look at that tattoo, and if necessary, to find out exactly how this woman had come to possess such dangerous knowledge. The reception area buzzed with excitement as families reunited with their newly commissioned officers. Maria pushed through the crowd, her eyes scanning frantically for Marcus among the sea of white uniforms. Her heart pounded with anticipation as she clutched her camera, ready to capture the moment she had been dreaming about for years. When she finally spotted him near the refreshment tables, talking animatedly with a group of his classmates, Maria felt tears spring to her eyes. Marcus looked so mature, so confident in his crisp uniform with the new ensign's bars gleaming on his shoulders. For a moment, she could hardly believe that this impressive young officer was the same little boy she had raised on her own after his father's death. "Marcus," she called out, waving her hand to get his attention. When he turned and saw her, his face broke into a huge grin that reminded her exactly of the child he had been. He excused himself from his friends and walked quickly toward her, his stride confident and purposeful. "Mom, you made it." Marcus swept her into a bear hug that lifted her feet off the ground. "I was starting to worry when I didn't see you during the ceremony." "I was there taking pictures of everything," Maria laughed, holding him tight before stepping back to look at him properly. "You look so handsome, so professional. I can hardly believe you're really an officer now." "I can hardly believe it myself," Marcus admitted, straightening his uniform jacket proudly. "Wait until you meet some of my classmates. They're going to love you." As Marcus led her toward his group of friends, Maria felt that familiar mixture of pride and nervousness. She wanted to make a good impression on these young people, who had shared such an important part of Marcus's life. But she was acutely aware of the differences between her background and theirs. Most of their families seemed to move through this environment with an ease that spoke of generations of military service and social privilege. "Everyone. This is my mom, Maria Santos," Marcus announced as they rejoined the group. "Mom, these are my roommates, David Chen, whose dad is an admiral, and Robert Williams, whose family has been Navy for 3 generations. The young men were polite and welcoming, expressing genuine pleasure at meeting her and praising Marcus's achievements during his time at the academy. Maria found herself relaxing slightly as she listened to their stories about shared experiences, difficult classes, and the challenges of military training. These were good young people, she realized, and they clearly respected and cared about her son. While she chatted with the new officers, Maria remained unconsciously aware of her sleeve and the hidden tattoo beneath it. The habit of concealing it had become so automatic over the years that she rarely thought about it consciously anymore. But in this military environment, surrounded by people whose lives revolved around service and sacrifice, she felt particularly sensitive about keeping that part of her past hidden. Unknown to Maria, Commander Mitchell had been moving systematically through the reception area, ostensibly fulfilling his official duties but actually positioning himself to get a better look at her, and possibly her tattoo. His years of covert operations had taught him how to observe targets without appearing to do so, and he had been studying her interactions with her son and his friends. What James observed only deepened his curiosity and concern. The woman's body language and mannerisms suggested someone who was definitely hiding something, but not in a way that seemed threatening or deceptive. Instead, she seemed to be protecting herself, as if she carried some burden or secret that she felt others might not understand or accept. When he saw her unconsciously adjust her sleeve for what must have been the 10th time since the ceremony ended, James knew he had to find a way to approach her, but he needed to be careful. If his suspicions about the tattoo were correct, confronting her directly could be dangerous for both of them, especially in such a public setting. James waited until Marcus and his friends became engaged in an animated discussion about their upcoming assignments before making his move. He approached the group casually, as if he had simply been circulating through the reception and happened to notice them. "Excuse me," he said, addressing Marcus directly. "I'm Commander Mitchell. I couldn't help but notice that you're planning to request SEAL training. That's a challenging path, but rewarding for those who are suited to it." Marcus's eyes widened with recognition and respect. "Yes, sir. It's been my goal since I was accepted to the academy. I've been preparing for BUDS training for the past 2 years." "Good to hear. Physical preparation is important, but mental toughness is what really matters," James replied, genuinely interested in the young man's determination. "If you don't mind me asking, what motivated you to choose special operations?" As Marcus began explaining his desire to serve in the most demanding military units, James found himself impressed by the young man's thoughtful responses and clear sense of purpose. But he was also aware that Maria had become noticeably tense since his introduction. She stood slightly apart from the group now, her posture more rigid and her expression guarded. "My mom always taught me that if you're going to do something, you should do it the best way possible," Marcus continued. "She raised me to never take the easy path if the hard path leads to something better." James turned his attention to Maria, offering what he hoped was a reassuring smile. "You must be very proud of him. It takes tremendous dedication to succeed at the academy, especially for someone coming from outside a military family." "I am very proud," Maria replied carefully. "Marcus has always been determined to serve his country. I support him completely, even though I know the training will be dangerous." There was something in her tone, a depth of understanding about military dangers, that caught James's attention. Most civilian parents expressed worry about their children entering military service. But Maria's concern seemed more specific, as if she understood exactly what kinds of dangers Marcus might face. "Military service always involves risks," James acknowledged. "But the training is designed to prepare them for those challenges. Has anyone in your family served before?" Maria's hesitation was brief but noticeable. "My husband was in the army," she said finally. "He died in an accident several years ago." The answer was truthful but incomplete, James realized. Something about the way she phrased it, combined with her obvious discomfort, suggested there was much more to the story. And the partial tattoo he had glimpsed was definitely not the kind of memorial that a widow would typically get to honor a soldier who had died in a routine accident. As the conversation continued, James found himself studying Maria more carefully. Despite her obvious nervousness around him, there was something in her bearing that spoke of strength and resilience. She was clearly devoted to her son, but there was also a quality about her that suggested she had faced serious challenges and emerged stronger for them. When Marcus was called away by one of his instructors, James saw an opportunity. "Mrs. Santos, would you mind if I asked you a few questions about Marcus's preparation for SEAL training? As someone who will be involved in evaluating candidates, I'm always interested in understanding what family support looks like." Maria looked uncertain, glancing around as if considering whether to make an excuse and leave. But her love for Marcus won out over her discomfort. "Of course," she said. "I'll do anything I can to help Marcus succeed." As they moved slightly away from the crowd to continue their conversation, James knew he was approaching a critical moment. Whatever secrets Maria Santos was carrying, he was about to discover them. James guided Maria to a quieter area near the edge of the reception, away from the bustling crowd but still within sight of Marcus and his friends. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the academy grounds, and Maria found herself feeling increasingly uncomfortable under the commander's intense gaze. Something about his questions felt more serious than casual conversation, though she could not quite identify what was making her so nervous. "Marcus mentioned that you've been supporting his goal to become a SEAL for several years," James began, his tone carefully neutral. "That shows remarkable understanding of what the training involves. Most civilian parents don't really grasp the intensity of special operations work." Maria shifted her weight from one foot to the other, unconsciously pulling her sleeve down to ensure it covered her tattoo completely. "I've tried to learn as much as I could about what Marcus wants to do. I know it's dangerous, but I also know it's important work." "It is," James agreed, studying her face carefully. "The men who serve in special operations often carry burdens that civilian families can't fully understand. The missions, the secrecy, the constant deployment schedule. It takes a special kind of family to support that lifestyle." Something in his emphasis on the word secrecy made Maria look at him more sharply. For the first time since their conversation began, she had the uncomfortable feeling that Commander Mitchell was not just making polite conversation about her son's career goals. There was something in his manner, an intensity that reminded her of interrogators she had encountered years ago in a very different context. "Commander Mitchell," she said carefully, "is there something specific you need to know about Marcus? Has he done something wrong?" "Not at all," James replied quickly. "Marcus has an excellent record here at the academy. I'm more curious about his family background, his motivation, the experiences that shaped his desire to serve in special operations." Maria felt her heart rate increase. The way he phrased the question felt like a probe, as if he suspected there was more to her family's military connections than she had revealed. She glanced back toward Marcus, who was still engaged in animated conversation with his classmates. completely unaware of the tension building between his mother and the SEAL commander. "My husband served with honor," Maria said, her voice taking on a slightly defensive edge. "His death was a tremendous loss for both Marcus and me, but it didn't change Marcus's determination to serve his country." James nodded sympathetically, but his eyes remained sharp and analytical. "I'm sure your husband's service was an inspiration to Marcus. What unit did he serve with?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Maria realized that her answers were being evaluated in some way she did not fully understand, and that Commander Mitchell's interest in her family went far beyond casual curiosity. She felt trapped between her desire to help Marcus and her instinct to protect secrets that had been buried for nearly 15 years. "He was Special Forces," she said finally, hoping that the general designation would satisfy the commander's curiosity without revealing specifics that could be dangerous. But James's reaction told her immediately that her answer had only deepened his suspicions. His posture changed subtly, becoming more alert, and his eyes seemed to bore into her with new intensity. "Special Forces covers a lot of different units," he said quietly. "Was he Green Beret? Rangers? Something else?" Maria felt perspiration beginning to form on her forehead despite the cooling afternoon air. She realized that she had walked into exactly the kind of situation she had spent years trying to avoid. This man was not asking innocent questions about her late husband's military service. He suspected something specific, and every answer she gave seemed to lead him closer to information that needed to remain secret. "Look, Commander," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I don't understand why you're asking me these questions. My husband has been dead for nearly 15 years. His service record has nothing to do with Marcus's qualifications for SEAL training." "You're absolutely right," James agreed, but he did not back down. "I apologize if I'm making you uncomfortable. It's just that in my line of work I've learned to notice details that others might miss. And I've noticed some things about you that suggest your family's military background might be more complex than most." Maria felt her breath catch in her throat. "What kinds of things?" James hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing his options. Then he made a decision that would change everything for both of them. "Mrs. Santos, a few minutes ago I happened to catch a glimpse of what appears to be a tattoo on your left forearm. I only saw a small portion of it, but what I saw included elements that are specific to a very particular type of military unit, the kind of unit that most people don't even know exists." Maria felt the blood drain from her face. For 15 years she had been so careful to keep that tattoo hidden, to avoid exactly this kind of conversation. She looked around frantically, making sure no one else could overhear them, then met James's eyes with a mixture of fear and resignation. "I don't know what you think you saw," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I think I saw part of a memorial tattoo for someone who served in a classified special operations unit," James said gently but firmly, "the kind of unit where family members sometimes know more about the real nature of military service than they're supposed to. The kind of unit where family members sometimes carry burdens that they can never share with anyone." Maria closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of years of secrecy and grief pressing down on her. When she opened them again, there were tears threatening to spill over. "Please," she whispered. "Marcus doesn't know. No one knows. It's not something that can ever come out." James felt a mixture of vindication and sympathy wash over him. His instincts had been correct, but seeing the pain and fear in Maria's eyes made him realize that whatever secret she was carrying had cost her tremendously over the years. "Mrs. Santos," he said softly, "I'm not here to cause trouble for you or your family, but if your husband served where I think he served, then there are things about Marcus's background that the Navy needs to know before he enters SEAL training, not for security reasons, but for his own protection." Maria stared at him for a long moment, trying to process what he was telling her. "What do you mean?" "I mean that if your husband was involved in certain operations, there might be people who would be very interested in his son's military career. People who might see Marcus as a way to gather information or settle old scores. The kind of people who make careers out of remembering names and holding grudges." The color drained completely from Maria's face as the implications of his words sank in. She had spent so many years focused on protecting the secrecy of her husband's work that she had never considered how that secrecy might actually put Marcus in danger. "Oh God," she breathed. "I never thought about that. I just wanted to keep his father's secrets safe. I never imagined that keeping them secret might make Marcus a target." James placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Mrs. Santos, I think it's time you told me exactly who your husband was and what he did. Because if I'm right about what I saw in that tattoo, your son is about to enter a world where having the wrong enemies can be fatal. Maria looked across the reception area to where Marcus was laughing with his new classmates, completely unaware that his future might be hanging in the balance of the conversation happening 50 feet away. The sight of his happiness and innocence made her decision for her. If there was any chance that her secrets could put him in danger, she had to take that risk seriously. Not here, she said quietly to James. Too many people around. If we're going to talk about this, it needs to be somewhere private. James nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. There's a small coffee shop about 10 minutes walk from here. It's usually quiet in the late afternoon. Would that work? I need to tell Marcus I'm leaving for a while, Maria said, glancing back toward her son. I can't just disappear without explanation. Of course. Tell him you're meeting with me to discuss his SEAL application. It's not entirely untrue, and it gives us a legitimate reason to be meeting privately. Maria walked back to Marcus, her mind racing as she tried to figure out exactly how much she was going to have to reveal to this stranger. For 15 years, she had kept her husband's secrets locked away so tightly that sometimes she almost convinced herself they weren't real. Now she was about to open that door to someone she had known for less than an hour. Marcus, I'm going to step out for a little while with Commander Mitchell, she told her son, forcing her voice to remain calm and normal. He wants to discuss your application for SEAL training. Marcus looked pleased and slightly nervous. That's great, Mom. Don't tell him any embarrassing stories about me, okay? Despite everything, Maria managed to smile. I promise to only tell him the good stuff. 20 minutes later, Maria and James sat across from each other in a small, nearly empty coffee shop near the academy. Maria wrapped her hands around a cup of tea she had no intention of drinking, using the warmth to steady her nerves. James had ordered black coffee but had not touched it either. Both of them understood that this conversation could have consequences that went far beyond a mother's concern for her son's military career. Before I tell you anything, Maria began, I need to know exactly who you are and why you care about this, because if I'm going to trust you with information that could get people killed, I need to understand what your agenda is. James appreciated her directness. In her position, he would have asked the same questions. Fair enough. My name is James Mitchell. I'm a Navy SEAL commander with 15 years of active duty, including multiple deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, and several places I can't name. I've been involved in classified operations, and I understand how the world of special operations actually works. He paused, considering how much to reveal about his own background. I'm here today because several of this year's graduates have been selected for SEAL training, and part of my job is to evaluate their readiness. But I'm also here because Admiral Richardson asked me to keep an eye out for anything unusual. The military intelligence community has been tracking some concerning activities lately, and they're being extra careful about who gets access to sensitive information. Maria absorbed this information, trying to assess whether she could trust him.
What kind of concerning activities?
The kind where people with old grudges against American special operations are starting to surface again. People who have long memories and access to resources that make them dangerous. James met her eyes directly, the kind of people who might be very interested in the family members of operators who were involved in certain classified missions. Maria felt her stomach drop. You think someone might target Marcus because of who his father was? I think it's possible, which is why I need to know exactly who his father was and what he was involved in. James leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Santos, I've been doing this long enough to recognize when someone is carrying the kind of burden that comes with being connected to the darkest parts of military operations. Whatever your husband did, whatever you know about it, keeping it secret might not be protecting anyone anymore. Maria closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, James could see that she had made her decision. My husband's name was Eduardo Santos. He was a Green Beret, but that was just his cover assignment. His real work was with a joint task force that officially never existed. They called it Operation Nightfall. James felt his blood run cold. He had heard whispers about Operation Nightfall during his early years as a SEAL, but he had never been cleared to know any details. It was the kind of mission that existed in the shadows between official military operations and intelligence work. The kind that left no paper trail and no survivors who could talk about what really happened. Jesus, he breathed. How do you know about Nightfall? Because I was there, Maria said simply. Not as an operator, but as support personnel. I was the intelligence analyst with a specialty in Central American cartels. The mission required someone who could speak Spanish fluently and understand the local criminal networks. I was assigned to the team for 6 months. James stared at her, trying to reconcile the nervous mother he had been observing with the idea of a woman who had been cleared for one of the most classified operations in recent military history. That's where you met Eduardo? That's where I fell in love with Eduardo, Maria corrected. We both knew that relationships between team members were against regulations, but we also knew that we might not survive the mission. When you're living in constant danger, normal rules start to seem less important. She paused, lost in memories that were clearly still painful. We managed to keep our relationship secret during the mission. Afterward, when we were both stateside and debriefed, we started seeing each other officially. We got married 2 years later. And Marcus? Marcus was born 3 years after that. Maria continued her story, her voice growing steadier as she revealed secrets she had carried alone for so many years. Eduardo left active duty when Marcus was born. We both did. The mission had ended, and we thought we could just disappear into normal civilian life. Eduardo got a job in construction, and I worked part-time at a local school while raising Marcus. For 8 years, we actually managed to convince ourselves that we had escaped that world. James listened intently, understanding now why Maria had seemed so familiar with military dangers and protocols. She was not just a civilian mother worried about her son. She was someone who had lived inside the most dangerous parts of military operations and understood exactly what kinds of threats existed in that world. What happened 8 years later? He asked, though he suspected the answer would not be pleasant. Someone found us, Maria said simply. We never knew exactly who or how, but one day Eduardo came home from work acting strange. He was nervous, constantly checking the windows, making sure the doors were locked. He told me he had seen someone watching our house, someone who seemed familiar, but he could not place from where. She took a sip of her tea, her hands trembling slightly. 3 days later, there was an accident at his construction site. A crane malfunctioned and dropped a load of steel beams. Eduardo was killed instantly along with 2 other workers. James felt his chest tighten. But you don't think it was really an accident? The investigation concluded it was equipment failure. The company was fined for poor maintenance and the families received settlements. But Eduardo had been working construction for 8 years without any problems, and he was always extremely careful about safety protocols. Maria met James's eyes. 3 days before he died, he made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I would never tell Marcus about Operation Nightfall. He made me swear that I would keep our son as far away from that world as possible. But Marcus chose the military anyway, James observed. Marcus chose the military because his father was his hero, and he wanted to serve his country with the same dedication, Maria said. I tried to discourage him at first, but I realized that forbidding him from military service would only make him more curious about why. So I supported his decision, but I made sure he never knew the real details about what his father had done. James was beginning to understand the full scope of the problem. Mrs. Santos, if your husband was killed because of his connection to Operation Nightfall, then the people responsible have been watching your family for 15 years. They know about Marcus, they know about his military career, and they definitely know he's about to enter SEAL training. Maria felt panic rising in her chest. What does that mean? Are you saying Marcus is in danger just by being Eduardo's son? I'm saying that people who hold grudges against special operations teams often target the children of operators, especially when those children follow in their parents' footsteps, James explained grimly. They see it as poetic justice or as a way to send a message to other operators. Oh God, Maria whispered. I thought I was protecting him by keeping the truth secret. I thought if no one knew about Eduardo's real work, Marcus would be safe. You did the right thing at the time, James assured her. But now that Marcus is entering the special operations community himself, the secrecy might actually be putting him at greater risk. If the Navy doesn't know about his family history, they can't take appropriate precautions to protect him. Maria looked across the coffee shop, trying to process the implications of what James was telling her. What kind of precautions? Background checks for anyone who gets close to him during training. Extra security protocols during deployment. Most importantly, making sure that Marcus himself understands the risks so he can be properly vigilant. James leaned forward. Mrs. Santos, I need to ask you to show me that tattoo. because if it contains specific information about Operation Nightfall, it might help us identify exactly who we're dealing with. Maria hesitated, glancing around the coffee shop to make sure they were not being observed. Then she slowly rolled up her left sleeve, revealing the tattoo that had remained hidden for so many years. James stared at the intricate design, feeling his worst fears confirmed. The tattoo was far more detailed than he had glimpsed at the reception. It included not just military insignia, but specific code names, dates, and geographic references that could only have been known by someone with direct access to classified mission files. "This is incredibly detailed," he said quietly. "This isn't just a memorial tattoo. This is like a complete mission summary." "Eduardo designed it," Maria explained. "He said that if something ever happened to both of us, at least there would be some record of what really happened during Nightfall. He said the official records would probably be destroyed or classified forever, but this would remain as proof that the mission actually occurred." James studied the tattoo more carefully, recognizing several elements that related to intelligence he had gathered during his own classified operations. "Mrs. Santos, this tattoo contains information that could be extremely valuable to foreign intelligence services. It also contains information that could be used to identify other surviving members of the Nightfall team." "Are you saying that other team members might still be alive?" Maria asked, hope creeping into her voice for the first time. "I'm saying it's possible, but I'm also saying that if hostile forces know about this tattoo, they might see you and Marcus as the keys to finding those other team members." James made a decision. "I need to make some phone calls. There are people in the intelligence community who need to know about this immediately." "What about Marcus?" Maria asked. "He's supposed to report for SEAL training in 2 months. Do I tell him the truth? Do I ask him to withdraw from the program?" James considered the question carefully. "That's ultimately your decision, but I think telling him the truth is the safest option at this point. Marcus is about to enter a world where information is power and secrets can be deadly. He needs to understand exactly what kind of legacy he's inherited from his father." Maria nodded slowly, understanding that her years of protecting Marcus through secrecy were about to end. "Will you help me tell him? He's going to have questions that I can't answer, and he's going to need guidance from someone who understands the military world better than I do." "Of course," James agreed, "but first I need to make those phone calls. Because if I'm right about what this tattoo represents, Marcus isn't the only person who might be in danger. This could be part of something much larger than just one family's secrets." As they prepared to leave the coffee shop, Maria felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. After 15 years of carrying her burden alone, she was finally sharing it with someone who could help. But she was also realizing that the danger she had tried so hard to protect Marcus from might have been growing stronger during all those years of silence. The truth, it seemed, was about to change everything for all of them. 2 hours later, Maria and James returned to the academy grounds to find Marcus waiting anxiously near the main entrance. The reception had ended, and most of the other families had departed, leaving the campus much quieter than it had been during the celebration. Marcus's face showed a mixture of curiosity and concern as he watched his mother and the SEAL commander approach. "How did it go?" Marcus asked, looking between them. "You were gone for a really long time. Is everything okay with my SEAL application?" Maria felt her heart clench as she looked at her son's trusting face. In a few minutes, she was going to shatter his understanding of everything he thought he knew about his family's history. But James had convinced her that the truth, however painful, was now the only way to keep Marcus safe. "Marcus, we need to talk," she said gently. "There are some things about your father that you need to know before you begin SEAL training." Marcus's expression grew more serious. "What kind of things? You always said Dad died in a construction accident." "He did die in a construction accident," Maria said carefully, "but there's more to the story than I've told you. Commander Mitchell has helped me understand that keeping these secrets might actually put you in danger, now that you're entering the special operations community." James stepped forward. "Marcus, is there somewhere private we can talk? This conversation needs to happen away from public areas." Marcus led them to a small conference room in one of the academic buildings, using his new officer's access to unlock the door. Once they were seated around the conference table, Maria took a deep breath and began the most difficult conversation of her life. "Your father wasn't just a regular soldier," she began. "His official record shows that he was a Green Beret. But his real work was with a classified special operations unit. I was part of that unit too, as an intelligence analyst. Marcus stared at his mother in shock. You were in the military? You never told me that. I couldn't tell you. The mission we were involved in was so classified that even acknowledging its existence could have put people in danger. Maria rolled up her sleeve, revealing the detailed tattoo that had started this entire conversation. This is a memorial to that mission and to your father's real military service. Marcus leaned forward to examine the tattoo, his eyes widening as he took in the intricate details. Even without understanding all the symbols and codes, he could see that this was far more complex than a simple memorial design. The mission was called Operation Nightfall, James explained. It involved infiltrating Central American drug cartels that were suspected of providing support to terrorist organizations. Your parents spent 6 months undercover in some of the most dangerous territory in the hemisphere. That's where we fell in love, Maria added softly. We knew it was against regulations, but we also knew we might not survive the mission. After it was over, we got married and tried to build a normal life together. Marcus was struggling to process this information. But if Dad was such a successful special operations soldier, why did he leave the military? Why was he working construction when he died? Maria and James exchanged glances. This was the part of the story that would be hardest for Marcus to accept. Because someone from the mission found us, Maria said. 8 years after we thought we had successfully disappeared into civilian life, your father started noticing signs that we were being watched. 3 days later, he was killed in what appeared to be an equipment malfunction at his construction site. You think someone murdered Dad? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We think it's possible, James answered. People involved in missions like Operation Nightfall sometimes make enemies who never forget and never forgive. Your father's death might have been a genuine accident, but the timing was suspicious. Marcus sat in silence for several minutes, staring at his mother's tattoo and trying to reconcile this new information with everything he had believed about his family. Finally, he looked up with a mixture of anger and confusion. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? I've been preparing for SEAL training for years. Don't you think I had a right to know that my father was killed because of his military service? I was trying to protect you, Maria said, tears starting to form in her eyes. Your father made me promise to keep you away from that world. He was afraid that if you knew the truth, you might become a target too. But I chose the military anyway, Marcus pointed out, and now I'm about to enter the same community that might have gotten Dad killed. James nodded grimly. That's exactly the problem. The people who might have targeted your father 15 years ago are probably still out there. And now that you're entering SEAL training, you're going to be much more visible to anyone who's been watching your family. Marcus stood up and began pacing around the small conference room. So what are you saying? That I should withdraw from SEAL training? That I should give up everything I've worked for because of something that happened when I was 8 years old? I'm saying that you need to understand the risks so you can make an informed decision, James replied. The Navy can provide additional security protocols if they know about your family history, but they can't protect you from threats they don't know exist. What kind of additional security? Marcus asked. Background checks for anyone who gets close to you during training, monitoring of your communications for suspicious activity, possibly even a security detail during certain phases of your training. James paused. It's also possible that knowing about your background might actually make you more valuable to the SEAL community. Intelligence analysts with your mother's experience are rare, and the knowledge contained in that tattoo might be useful for current operations. Maria looked alarmed. I don't want to be drawn back into that world. I just want Marcus to be safe. Mom, Marcus said, stopping his pacing to look directly at her. I appreciate that you were trying to protect me, but I'm not 8 years old anymore. I'm a commissioned naval officer, and I'm about to become a SEAL. If there are people out there who see me as a target because of Dad's service, then I need to know about them so I can be ready. He sat back down and reached across the table to take his mother's hand. I understand why you kept this secret for so long, but hiding from danger isn't going to make it go away. If anything, it just makes us more vulnerable because we're not prepared. James felt a surge of respect for the young officer. Marcus was handling this revelation with exactly the kind of calm analysis and strategic thinking that would serve him well in special operations. So what do we do now? Marcus asked. Now I make some phone calls to people in the intelligence community who need to know about this, James replied. We're going to find out exactly who might still be interested in your family, and we're going to make sure the Navy has all the information they need to keep you safe during training. And Marcus, Maria added, we're going to stop keeping secrets from each other. If you're going to enter this world, then you deserve to know everything about what your father did and what it might mean for your future. Marcus nodded seriously. I want to know everything, the good and the bad. If I'm going to be a SEAL, I need to understand what I'm inheriting from Dad's service. As they prepared to leave the conference room, James realized that this graduation day had turned into something none of them had expected. A mother's attempt to protect her son by keeping family secrets had inadvertently led to a revelation that might change the course of multiple military careers and ongoing intelligence operations. But looking at Marcus's determined expression and Maria's relieved face, James was confident they had made the right decision. The truth was always dangerous in the world of special operations, but it was also the only foundation on which real security could be built. The next phase of Marcus Santos's military career was going to be unlike anything the Navy had planned for, but it was also going to be exactly what the intelligence community needed to finally close the book on Operation Nightfall and the enemies it had created 15 years ago.